Well, welcome back to another edition on Season 2 of the Powered Up Coaches Show, brought to you by Sideline Power, the #1 coaching communication gear company for you coaches. Folks, this is an absolute blast talking with Boone Central head coach Mark Hudson, fresh off a state championship run. So many great lessons to learn from this, but let's start with how he created his own identity. He took over for a highly successful football coach at Boone Central and what he did to create his own identity as the new head coach. Also, how does a coach involve their family in their career? Because it's a necessary part of the job. The family's got to be with you, and he'll talk about his strategy. You know, Coach Hudson has multiple degrees in psychology and how that has helped him to become the best coach he can be. And lastly, you're going to learn about how you free your team up to have their own personality and their own identity on the football field, something he mastered over his career. This is a blast, folks. Settle in, enjoy this episode with Coach Mark Hudson. Well, what I love about this opportunity to talk with you, Coach, is that there's not a lot of coach speak with what you do, and you're the guy that coined the phrase, and I absolutely loved it. I believe what you said is Northeast Nebraska is the SEC of Class C football, and that has always stuck with me. So let's start right there, because I just interviewed Coach Beller this morning. I've interviewed Coach Frinzen just a couple weeks ago. There is something in the water up there in Northeast Nebraska because it is tough football. What is it that builds such great teams up there?
I always give credit, where it starts with the moms. You could have tough moms. Not that they're not all the way across the state, but we have tough moms and old fashioned, and I think it's a lot of that rural mentality, and I think it's the geography. We're packed a little tighter up there. I coached a lot of years in South Central, where I'm from, and out west, and you get farther away, and they're still rivals, but when you're 6 miles away, it turns up the heat a little bit. There's a lot of tradition in those communities also, and with tradition comes expectations, and with that comes just that little bit of pressure and that little bit of extra that I think makes it a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got to tell you made a lot of moms happy with that answer right there. But let's jump around and start in the early life here. You, speaking of jumping around, you jumped around a little bit. You went to elementary school, I believe, in Minden.
I was born in Minden.
Minden, okay.
Yep.
Then on to Fairmont.
Fairmont. Yep.
Yeah. Ended up in, Shelton High School, right?
Yep.
So having that opportunity to be in multiple communities, good, bad, what was your experience with that?
Growing up, you kind of, I didn't enjoy kind of the main move where we went from Fairmont to Shelton, but, I will say it's super valuable. I even kind of kept that in the back of my mind when it was time for us to move from Ravenna with my kids. I really felt that was something that I could lean on when I went to college, that it wasn't quite as anxiety producing to have that experience. So, I think it's good if it's approached the right way. I think in our world it's getting smaller and smaller, and people ask where you're from, and I think pretty soon we're all just going to say Nebraska, because it's culturally about the same, So
yeah. Well, and it amazes me how many small towns. Every coach, it seems like I've interviewed the last 2 years, have all come from. So few have come from Lincoln or Omaha. It's been Northeast or Western Nebraska, and there's something about the small town values. I don't care where you're at, that we've got to hold on to. What do we get from those small town values from your perspective, coaching kids in Boone Central? What comes with that?
Yeah, I said it earlier, that old fashioned mentality of, hard work, toughness, not that those aren't things you can't find in bigger places. But I do think, there's a little bit more of that. It's okay to bark at my kid a little bit. Mm-hmm. It's okay to get on them a little bit more. And I think the good programs everywhere have those. But I do just think there's a little bit less of that oversight. There's a little bit less checking up on your kid. There's a little bit more independence with the kids. And so I think sometimes that maybe helps them when it comes to, being in tough situations and having to think for themselves.
Yeah. I think that is one thing that I notice is, and Ashland is still considered a small town, is that there's a lot more trust it seems like in their coaches, because there's that sense of community. We see you out, we see you about, But that also has a double-edged sword, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So tell me about the things you love about that, because that trust factor is greater, but also some things that can probably work against you from time to time.
Well, absolutely. In a small town, they love you, they support you. Sometimes they love it too much. Sometimes, in the world, not just social media world, but small towns, they're comfortable with you. And I have a 10:30 rule. You're out in the public, and it's time to go home at 10:30. Whether things are going well or whether you're at a completely social event. But sometimes at the local tavern or out, someone will tell you, hey, you know what were you thinking on that third down play? It's yep, time to go home. Yeah.
That is such a good point. At least it's not coming from your wife, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny, speaking of small towns and kind of keeping an eye out for each other, I'll never forget the time my oldest son was driving way too fast through town, and I get a call from one of my younger son's mothers who said, hey, son was carousing a little bit around town, and it was the thing I appreciated the most, because I wasn't angry at her. I was so angry at my son. But you get a little bit of that help too, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it helps keeping your kids in line, helps keeping other people's kids in line. And even my own son, hey, you know what? Mom and dad are going to be gone, but understand, here's your rules, because everybody knows that, Coach Hudson's house is here and Mrs. Hudson's house is here. And, you better make sure that there's not anything unwilling going on there.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, listen, you loved sports. You played 3 sports all the way through high school.
Yep.
So one of the things that we're seeing more and more is that proliferation, right, of sports that's everywhere, but that's also meaning that kids are choosing to specialize. For those kids out there listening, why did basketball help you in football? Why did baseball help you in football? What were the things that you got from those sports?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a hot topic. We discuss it in our school all the time, and our leadership is big on multi-sport. I support multi-sport. The evolution of youth sports and where we're at with sports is a tricky field. For my own kids, I tell them you got to do more than 1. I want you to do 3. I don't know if 4 is realistic anymore. Yeah. 4 is tough. You got to be a really special athlete to go from one sport to the next and just do it, because of all the things that are happening in the off season. And I think people that don't have kids, or people that are maybe past their kids being done, don't understand how much extra kids are putting in these days. And I am the opposite of the people that are, this kids these days. I'm the opposite. I think kids work harder. I think they have more stress. I think they have 10 times more things. I think they've evolved in a better state than we have. So I see the other side of it. The benefits that you get is the competition. I think the sport specialization, I'm an anti-one sport guy. I do not believe in that at all. I think you need to be coached by somebody else. I think you need to be put in adversity. I think you need to not just do the thing you're best at. I think you need to learn how to be a role player and to fit in a different group. Going from, I played offensive line, and then, okay, so that's a thankless position. I really put myself into linebacker because I got to make some tackles, and I really kind of got a little bit more attention that way. And plus, that was my mentality. I like to hit people.
Right.
But then you'd switch over to basketball, where I get some more rebounds, and I had a different role. Learning how to work within that team aspect and change your roles, especially in a small town or in a group of kids where you're playing with the same group, I think that's really valuable. And I guess I'm searching for the word I'm looking for, but I think that versatility of moving from one sport and changing who maybe, the alpha player is or the guy is really helps in those other moments in that trust factor.
Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing, and by the way, I never thought about being coached by others as well. Different styles, different leadership styles, and learning to adapt.
I get that from coaching my own kid. That was really important for Hank to be coached by Coach Majerus as a wrestler and have a different approach. That was valuable.
In what way was it different?
You'd have to ask him. But there was a lot of times where, my expectations, we kind of make the joke, like, I'd bark at another player in practice and he'd just shrug his shoulders, and that's mowing the lawn on a Tuesday in our house, and that's just the way it is. Where I think Coach Majerus was a little bit more, trying to find him to be and get to know his personality, and how it fit with Coach Majerus' style. And I think they came to an understanding about junior year where Hank was going to be super aggressive and was going to let the chips fall where they may, and he was a pinner, and sometimes that worked against him. And so maybe he could have done a little better his senior year because he was super aggressive, but they figured out how to make that work and understand each other. So,
yeah. Well, you got a chance to play a lot of sports, running around the neighborhood, I'm assuming.
yeah.
Tell me what mom and dad were like. Were they out, hey, get out there and play? Were they not supportive? Where did they fall when it came to you and your love of athletics?
Yeah. My dad was pretty supportive, quietly supportive. Mom was a big advocate. She wasn't a super athlete. She was from the 60s where they didn't have girl sports, cheerleader type and just really overly, I wouldn't say overly supportive, but highly supportive of my success. And, I was a late bloomer. Told all my kids that, just stick with things, try to do as many things as you can. You'll get better as you do with age. My dad was a really good basketball player at Gothenburg back in the 60s and a quarterback. And so I was a little bit different athlete playing offensive line and body size. So didn't matter. He was very supportive and very old fashioned. I remember coming home and complaining about basketball one time. And, one thing he said that'll stick with me forever, and I still tell my kids that I'm coaching to this day, is if you make less mistakes than the officials, you're going to win anyway. And I think that's something valuable that parents forget a lot because they play into that friendship game with mom and dad instead of holding a kid accountable for what could you have done better.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's wise guy. I mean, obviously your dad, and I don't mean wise guy in the way we think of it. I mean a wise man, smart man, because of principle as well, right? Mm-hmm. So there are rewards that I got to imagine that came with that for you as a kid, but there were probably things that could be challenging when your dad is in a leadership role at a school in a principal's chair. Talk about both of those and how that influenced you growing up.
Yeah, you got a little more gym time. You got to go up to the school when other kids didn't. Be a little bit of a shoot around and have access to things that some of your friends, just that was foreign to them. So that was cool. But, then the favoritism, when we moved from 6th grade going into 7th grade, and he was a tough principal. He was an accountable guy. He changed some culture in Shelton when we got there. And, some of the students didn't like it. A few teachers didn't like it, for the first 6 months. And then once they understood what the vision and expectations were, then things were great. Then everybody appreciated the fact that he held kids accountable in the hallway and he didn't compromise on certain things. But that first 6 months, it wasn't easy. I'd broken my leg in a baseball game. So being an athlete, I wasn't able to compete for that first football season and winter season. So, having to rely on my personality, I had to become a better speaker. I had to become a little bit funnier. I had to do some things that, maybe have helped me later on in life. But, there was some bullying, there was some picking on and those things that happen to you. That
on you?
Oh, on me, absolutely.
You're kidding me. I look at you, I'm like, who picked on you?
I was a late bloomer. I was kind of, I'm not a super skinny guy, but I was not very big in junior high. So, I went from 145-pound freshman to a 195-pound senior. So, yeah, late bloomer came along. So, yeah, there was a lot of great memories and a lot of good things, but I think just that hard work and holding things accountable and having things that, I'm not going to compromise on, and that was Ron Hudson. So.
Yeah. That is, I got to start there because when you say your dad had to come in and change the culture, what an incredible lesson for you. Even though at this point you have no idea probably you're going to coach, but what an incredible lesson for you to get to see this up close. And I imagine you were just a sponge. And what did you pull away from that? What the hard work he had to do, what was a lesson or two you pulled from that watching him?
Yeah, I don't think at the time I didn't realize it. I realized, man, there's some people that are not not happy. There's some kids that are hollering at me. There's some kids that don't like him, holding them, accountable and giving them detentions for not being there on time or for cussing and blah, 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 blah. But I think as you got older and you started to see, my class was very successful. We never won a championship, but we were in the mix. We were in the top 3, 4, 5 in all those sports, football, basketball, baseball. And you saw that the way the school was run and the respect that the teachers had grown over the years for that leadership. And then once you graduate and you come out and you come back and then he retires when you're 25 and people are like, oh man, what a great principal we had. What a great principal we had. Those are things that I think in the educational world, you maybe don't see when it's happening, but you better have some integrity and you better have some ethics and you better know what you stand for. And I think those are some of the key things that carry over into coaching that I've taken from him through that is, building trust because people know that here's what his vision is, here's what he believes in. it's not going to change with the wind blowing. And I think those are things that are valuable in coaching that have helped me throughout.
Yeah. So you went through a part where you were bullied, which I think obviously as a coach, I imagine that is something that as well probably comes out in your teaching. But what was your defense mechanism? How did you deal with that at 145? Because it doesn't sound like you were throwing fists yet, right?
Yeah, no. Humor.
Yeah.
You know, I have a lot of friends that, you know, we pride ourselves on sometimes it's a little jagged, sometimes a little dark, but, you know, we're a pretty funny bunch, to be honest with you. Sometimes doesn't always translate, but those guys, it's like we didn't miss a beat. We can get on the phone right now, and our sense of humor is the same.
And these are the guys that you went to school with.
Yeah. My high school buddies, not my college buddies, but similar sense of humor there too. But you know, humor's a good way to handle things, but working harder.
Yeah.
You know, taking some of that frustration. And when I say it was, there's a lot of people that have had it a lot worse than I did, but you know, there was some. I would put the world as mild, but you know, it was still that your dad's the principal and we're going to pick on you.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it was. I had to prove myself even more. You know, as a kid who had a parent in the building.
I can only imagine they were going the other way in the hallway about 3 years later when you hit that growth spurt. Huh?
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
You know, the reason
payback happens.
Well, the reason I ask about that and your defense mechanism is because of this. You said to me, and I found this interesting, that the coaches, the mentors that you really look to the most in high school, most of the coaches are like, hey, Coach Smith, Coach Johnson, right? You talked about the funny and incredibly smart teachers that you were really you gravitated towards, and I'm wondering if that played a role, and if not, why were they your strongest mentors?
You know, I got pretty good grades in school. You know, in small town Nebraska, sometimes that we downplayed that a little bit. You know, it was a little bit, oh, you're the smart kid, you're the teacher's pet kid. So it was more athletics and it was more humor that was kind of lifted up in our culture of our community. And the teachers that were able to be super smart and use humor to get the whole class engaged, those were the ones that were well respected. So that I don't know why psychologically, but that really affirmed with me that, you know, hey, sense of humor is a good way to get people's attention and to get kids that are maybe a little bit, maybe not on board 100%, to get them to loosen up and realize, hey, they're all right. And then you can kind of get in and grab them.
Yeah. Great way to connect. Yeah. Give me one teacher that stands out to you that really did that for you.
You know, probably the first one that got my attention was probably a guy by the name of Dave Evertson, and he's out west someplace now, but he was our football coach, and he was a super smart science teacher. And, you know, we were kind of smart Alex, and he was able to spin it on us and have comebacks to us that other teachers didn't. He was very witty and very kind. He was young at the time, and did a really good job of being a smart Aleck back to us, which maybe, you know, in today's day and age, you'll say, well, you can't do that. You can't say that. But he made us kind of zip our mouths and go, wow, he kind of nailed us with that one.
Yeah.
It was never anything across the line, but it was just smart banter.
Yeah. Where was that moment that you knew you wanted to coach? When was it?
You know, I don't know specifically. I remember riding on buses and being like, man, I really like this. And now that I've been doing this a long time,
I liked riding on buses.
Well, yeah, I like going to the games. I like the pregame. I like that build up to it. I remember being a little kid and going fishing and doing things with my dad, and I'm drawing X's and O's and not knowing that wasn't normal, that normal kids aren't drawing plays all the time. When I got into college and I realized that I was going to miss it and I wanted to be involved somehow, and then I kind of got another guy that was like, hey, would you be interested? Yeah, I'll do that for a little while. And here I am 29 years later.
Yeah. Well, and there are a lot of grateful people for that, without a doubt. So you have two stints as an assistant, Ravenna and Sydney. And then you grab the reins at Ravenna as the head football coach, and a terrific run. I mean, 11 playoff appearances by my count. That might not be exact, but a lot, right?
Quite a few.
Yeah. And then you go to Boone Central, and you got to replace a guy in Arnie Johnson, who was there for a long time, very well respected. And coming off that 13-0 campaign.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people would say, I don't know if I've got the courage to do that. But that took a lot of courage to do that. How were you received going in behind a guy that finished his 13-0, won a lot of games in his career?
Well, first off, I said earlier that I was a smart guy, and that just proves that I'm not. I'm not very smart.
I like how you leaned in for the effect.
Yeah. I just wanted to be clear and enunciate that. I think in kind of looking back, I guess I will say maybe there was a little bit of a midlife crisis in my realm where I felt the need for a challenge and something else to do. I didn't believe in those things. I got a little background in psychology, and that when you're going through it, you don't realize it. But I wanted to do something else. I wanted to do something in coaching, maybe take one more swing, I guess was what I was telling people.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to a few other places. I wasn't super interested in going super big and getting into the city route. But I also didn't want to just be in the same place for 30 years. And that's no disregard for Ravenna. I have a lot of great friends there. I left on good terms there. Just needed to change. Mm-hmm. And this one popped up, and at the time I was ready. And I think I thought there was another opportunity I was going to get, a month or two before that, and that changed on me at the last second and didn't work out. And so when this one happened, it happened really fast. And so maybe if I would have had more time to think about it, maybe some of those 27 years following a guy who just won a state championship would have settled in a little bit longer. But I said, forget it, let's go for it, and accepted pretty much right away or an hour after it was offered, and felt there was an opportunity there. And I think the other big part pull-wise was, kid-wise, I was looking for a place like you talk about, Ashland or some small towns where your kids could ride bikes and they can trust their coaches, and I was looking for that. But to finish your question, as far as I do think that there was probably a little bit more apprehension on the community side than maybe I felt. They'd had a lot of success. I understood they had a lot of success. Coach Johnson did a fantastic job. But I think there was a lot more skepticism about Coach Hudson coming in, and it took probably that third year getting to the state finals, where we had a pretty good run there. And then, I could feel kind of a change where it was no longer, is this the guy or isn't this the guy?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of coaches who watch this show. There's a lot of non-coaches too. But for these coaches who are walking into a situation like that, whether they're following Arnie Johnson or no matter who they're following, what would be your advice for them to create your own identity?
Yeah. Have a balance. If you're coming into a place that is 13-0, let's start there. I think it's key to not reinvent the wheel. To come in, one of the things I did was, and I've been told in retrospect, you came in with a good enough self-esteem that you didn't have to change everything to make it yours. We still call our run game exactly how Arnie Johnson did, because at the time, I was like, oh, you're running similar plays to us. It's easier for me to learn the terminology that you guys use because, 80% of our plays are the same. I'll just call it how you call it so the kids don't have to learn my terminology. And I guess that was a really big deal. I guess the kids and the assistant coaches really appreciated that. Well, you went 13-0. I'm not going to come in and change everything. I kind of wanted to learn as much from the assistants, and Coach Johnson did a great job of stepping away and being an assistant coach down the road, just so he wasn't going to be involved that way. So that was supportive. But I think taking in as much information as you can about what they did and what they're doing better than you, and that you can learn, and then here's some areas that I could improve on, and there was a few areas that we could improve on. And being able to have that big picture look, I think, is important. If you're coming in and taking over, a program that hasn't had as much success, I think those are still valuable things to do, because every program has some things that they're doing well. Mm-hmm. And so being able to assess that and understand football and what's important to you, I call them negotiables and non-negotiables. And the negotiables, I'll call that semi and truck instead of toss left or 39 toss and 38 toss, or Colorado and Cherokee, whatever. It doesn't matter what we call it. But if it's non-negotiable, by goodness, we're going to be in better conditioning than these other teams. We're going to come out of the gate these first 2 weeks, and you're going to be the one with your hands on your knees, not us. That was a tough one, because they didn't do a lot of that when I got there, and our numbers were getting smaller. They couldn't two-platoon as much, and so that was probably the biggest transition those first 2 years was, we're going to do a little bit more conditioning. You're not going to tap your helmet and sub out all the time. So you got to figure out what's important to you and what you want to be known as.
Yeah. Well, you know, it says a lot about you that you came in and said, "Look, it's not going to just be everything. We're going to throw everything out. We're gonna stay with some things that really worked," and that shows a lot of security on your part. But you also shared with me one of your most humbling experiences was at one point in your career. Don't know who. You can share it if you'd like, but you worked for someone that didn't necessarily always get behind and support you. And I'm curious from a leader how valuable, you know, we always think about leadership lesson learning from the Tom Osborns, right? The Mark Hudsons. But sometimes you can take valuable leadership lessons from a leader that maybe isn't terribly dynamic. And what did you take from that?
What not to do. You know, learning what not to do is very valuable, just as much as what to do, you know. And I don't know if I kind of picked it up myself or picked it up from somebody, but a lot of times it's not, you know, what you say that makes you popular. It's what you don't say that doesn't torque off the wrong people or doesn't create a fire that you've got to go remedy. You know, it's having that sense of community and knowledge about what fits. And you know, not going to name names or getting too in depth, but you know, it's very humbling when you have risen up in the professional ranks, and you know, whether it's school psych, social studies, the different fields that I've been in, you know, most of the time, besides some parents and, you know, maybe a couple of other people that didn't agree with an approach or a technique, you know, you work hard, Mark, you do a good job, Mark, where, you know, the kids enjoy your class. And then, you know, when you have that boss that's like not very understanding or doesn't value your hard work, doesn't value your expertise, and maybe disagrees with you and just wants you to, I don't know, I guess I would say just go away and don't challenge them.
Yeah.
Or ask questions that are challenging. You know, that's humbling. It really kind of makes you step back and decide, you know, what your value system is. And you know, I talk a lot about self-reflection, and with the boys, I tell them, you know, you'd have to ask yourself, you know, why do you do what you do? Self-reflect about what it is that drives you. And having somebody that you disagree with that's in charge, you have to keep your value system about, okay, I'm here for the kids. What's the benefit of this? Is this something that we can survive? Is this something that we can get through and work together and just agree to disagree? Or is this something that, you know, maybe there's grass is greener on the other side of the road? So,
well, what I love about your background too is that you come from a place of psychology. You've got multiple degrees in psychology. And so, of course, that is what you do at Boone Central outside of football. And I can't imagine a more valuable degree and an education getting psychology as your educational foundation. How has that helped you?
Well, I tell all my players that don't know necessarily what they want to do, if you don't know, get a minor in psychology or get a minor in economics. Either one of them are going to pay dividends down the road. You know, and I didn't know necessarily this is the path I was going to be on. I really enjoyed psychology in college, and then when my playing career, I got cut short 1 year because I had some injuries and just time to move on and go do something else. And then I kind of got in the coaching rig, and that steered me away from the clinical side of psychology. And I went, okay, what can I do with kids? And it was school psychology. So I got involved in that. I've enjoyed that immensely. As I've gotten older and the longer I've done this, that's one of those investments that has continued to pay dividends as, you know, we see a change and a morph in kids. And I'm not saying it's negative, positive, whatever, but it's become more complex, I think, is how I would describe it. You know, kids today and the issues that they deal with.
How do you think that allows you to look at things differently?
I think it's important for all of us, whether you've got a background in it or not. And I will say this: any coach that's done this for longer than 5 years has a minor, has almost like a common law thing,
or a PhD,
in psychology, because you learn it one way or another. But I think being able to understand the perspective that kids are coming from is hugely valuable, and having those different backgrounds, or, you know, understanding the theories of personality and again, that why we do what we do and the mindset behind it helps you collect information with kids before you pass judgment. And, you know, I'd like to remind people we're teachers, we're educators, we're not judges. And so we can be disappointed in the kid, but we don't, you know, there'll be somebody down the road that'll judge them if they don't fix their behaviors. And so I'll be flexible and forgiving for a lot of different things. If you continue to make these bad decisions or wrong wrong habits that you've established, then we'll have to increase our consequences. But I think having that understanding about where kids are coming from, that's where it really pays dividends.
Yeah. The old saying, seek first to understand, then to be understood, right?
Absolutely.
Well, you're going to lean on, as you do every year, there's nothing different about this year, all of that education. Last year, your mantra over and over again, 17 seniors, right? Yep. 17 seniors, monster team, state championship team. This year, just 2 guys coming back. So how do you lean on all of those things you learn? And by the way, very talented group of guys that you've got. Mm-hmm. But how do you lean on that going into this year? Because it's probably dramatically different the way you approach this team than, say, a team with 17 seniors. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah. We said 7-on-7 passing league this morning, and it was a little bit different. We had to. I was talking to one of my assistants. I'm like, we've got a good bunch of kids. They're a little nicer than last year's bunch. They're a little bit, they're last year there was a lot of leaders, a lot of jockeying for position, and a lot of guys that were going to grab the bull by the horns and just take charge. And we're waiting to see who those leaders are and how they work together. Last year there was a little bit of here's the plan for the season, and here's what we have to set up so that when we get down to the nitty gritty and the playoffs, this is what the scouting reports are showing, so that if we need to fall back on some things, knowing the personality. It was right now, we're still trying to figure out who's going to take snaps, who's going to play right corner, who's going to play outside linebacker, who our left guard is. So it's a little bit more of still getting to know them and figuring out and sticking with the basics, which is making me a little bit nervous, because by this time last year we pretty much had a game plan, or a 2-season game plan in place. So
sure, a little easier with 17 seniors, right?
Yeah, and they'd been playing for a long time, and so they, like I told several people, they could make adjustments and in-game things that now we're kind of having to tell kids what to do. We're working on those basic reads, and it's a challenge, but it's fun.
Yeah. Here's the other thing that I so appreciate, and I look forward to every interview, but I love this because one of the things you said to me, I had a chance to interview you. I do a little play-by-play stuff for those who don't know, and got a chance to call one of your games. When we were talking about your team going in the semifinals, you said, look, they're not going to win a popularity contest. They're not always the quickest guys to help a guy off the field. They may not always be beloved on the other side, but they know who they are. And I'm just curious, as a coach, freeing them up to say, this is who you are, guys, and we're going to embrace that. I'm not going to try to change you. This is what has made you so tough and physical and win the fourth quarters. But that's a different approach, isn't it? And you weren't afraid to talk about it. How did that free them up, do you think, to play?
Well, they had to back it up. I mean, that was the main message. And some of it's reputation. When they were younger, they probably talked a little bit more, and we had made some improvements, and they're just so competitive and they're fiery. And once you get to know them, and you know their families, and you know how strong their parents are and how successful their parents are, and so they're great kids. Love every one of them. But it was a unique chemistry dynamic with that team, because they're all going to be highly successful. They're all going to go out in the world, and so that's what made them. They were so ultra competitive themselves that, man, if they're going to tackle you to the whistle or block you to the whistle, they're going to do that, because they're not necessarily just competing against you. They're competing against their teammate, because there's this internal competition amongst them that was so powerful and driven that. As a coach, like I said, my job was to rein them in and be like, okay, that's beyond the whistle. We're not allowing that. But I love the enthusiasm. I love the aggression. There wasn't anything dirty with our guys. It was just ultra aggressiveness. And it was, you got to stop on the whistle, because once they hit the switch, they were all competing against each other, but also for the, for the chemistry and the love of their brothers, and, and to represent their community and their family. And so they took it to another level. And sometimes that was the reining in, where sometimes perception from, the other fans, like, man, those guys they're just being ultra aggressive,
Yeah.
And, people talk about that. Well, they didn't, if we like you, if they like you, I know there was guys they were gonna talk to across the field, but if they don't know you, they put you there for a reason. It's not my job to help you get up all the time, and so that's not something that we discouraged, but it's also something that it wasn't. A lot of people like, well, you gotta No, it's a tough man sport, and I put you there for a reason. So why do I have to help you up every time?
Yeah.
You know, so it's not hurting anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're tough. They're Cowboys. And in all fairness, everyone knows here, we went up and played you. My son played for Ashland Greenwood. Tremendous semifinal game.
Great game.
And it was so much fun to watch. Now, here's the thing that I noticed up there. I go up to Boone Central. You talk about one of your mantras, right, is for your team.
My brothers, my family, my town.
And your town.
Yep.
That's the one I wanted to hit on, because we go up here. You guys are barbecuing everything under the sun. The smells were incredible. The atmosphere was incredible. There was not a seat to be had. People were everywhere.
Packed house.
Yeah. And so, again, how do you bring that community in and make them a part of it with also, again, keeping those barriers as well?
Yeah. It's a great question. In my younger days, I would have, stiff-armed everything, and, there's a separation and we have to be there. And one of the things with age comes wisdom, and I will say that, having my own son go through it has been a benefit, because I've been around these boys since, 5th grade, and I've been around their parents since 5th grade. And once you have a little bit more intimate relationship with them, and I mentioned it earlier where you talk about the difference in youth sports culture than it was. These parents have been involved in these kids' sports upbringing and teaching and life for a really long time. And so to find what they can help with in the high school is valuable, because it's not 1993 anymore where mom and dad dump you off and you just get on the bus, and half the time they're at the game, half the time they're not. They leave early. They're more invested in this. So, one of the things that I've learned in my wisdom is finding that balance between, I'm not going to stiff arm parents and say you can and you can't, and no. All right, moms, you are my biggest advocates, because there's no one that will fight for you as a coach and a kid than a mom that loves you. And if you can get a mom invested without overstepping their bounds and letting them know, here's where the line is, Friday night or Sunday film time, you're not allowed up those things, but here's the meals that I want you to do. Here's the organization I want you. Can you help me with this? Absolutely, coach. And finding those things that they'll help you with helps bring them in, and they become your best advocates, and then the rest of the community falls in line.
Yeah. There's a great book, by the way. You talk about football moms. Have you ever read Our Boys?
I can't remember.
That state championship team down in Kansas.
Yes,
Small school,
yep,
town of about Boone
Smith
Central
Center.
side. Yeah,
Yep,
Smith Center.
I read it. Yep.
And those mothers, that year they were on that big winning streak. And so coach was they had to donate money, right, for meals every week. And so what do the moms do? They come out at the first meeting, and if they'd won the state championship, they would have played 14 games or something. So they come out and say, well, you're going to pay for your meals for 14 weeks.
Yeah.
Coach is like, here we go. We got no other choice. We got to make it to the championship. So I love their mindset. Listen, speaking of mindset, your son, Hank, what a beast, what an animal. Got a chance to watch him up close, not just in that semifinal game, but in the Shrine Bowl. I went out there with Coach Thompson. We watched it, and he was terrific this year in that Shrine Bowl game, dominating. But to coach your son, we had a little chat before we came up here. It can be the most rewarding, but it can also be incredibly challenging. Talk about both of those ends of it.
Yeah. It was a little bit tougher than I thought. I think I shared that with you, that, I kind of went and think, oh, this is going to be fun. And man, he's going to have advantage. And then you get there, and then there's a second guess. The first thing is probably is he good enough? Has he earned it? Has he done all the things that other kids have done so that you're not favoring him? That's the first thing, is the anti-favoritism, is I better make sure that I'm not handing him something that he hasn't earned, because that's going to discredit me and discredit him. And then we're fighting an uphill battle. So, going into a sophomore year, that was probably the biggest one, in his first game, God bless, against Norfolk Catholic. I mean, baptism by fire, and we were fortunate enough to win that game for the first time I've ever, a Boone Central team that we've had has beaten Norfolk Catholic. So that was a big one. But, held his own that night, and that was a big part of it. And then it kind of grew from there. But, the mindset has to be, there has to be a separation. And I think that's the thing. A lot of people look at it and say, oh, geez, coach's kid, he gets all this extra. He probably got a little bit more in junior high as far as some technique and some work and some tips, and maybe his freshman year watching some film where he was a JV kid. about here's some mistakes that were made, here's some things to avoid, or here's how to do this right. And once he became a varsity guy, there wasn't nearly as much of that. I mean, we're talking Mrs. Hudson can vouch maybe 5 minutes or every other week there's stuff at home. Otherwise, we'd really try to keep that separate. So that's probably the negative. But the rewards are, I don't even know if I've probably realized the rewards yet. You talked about the Shrine Bowl, and that was probably the first time that I've sat and watched from the stands. It was almost emotional. And then, as you said, and thank you for the compliment, but as you watch through the first quarter and you're like having a conversation in your head going, man, he's doing pretty good against some of the better players in the state. And he's holding his own inside. They're running to the outside and they're having to throw it because it's tough sledding inside. And you're like, all right. So that's a really good feeling. That's a pretty proud feeling when you're competing against that kind of competition.
Yeah.
So the highs are higher and the lows are lower.
I think you were able to really appreciate that, right, at the
Absolutely.
Shrine Bowl. And there are times, and having coached my kids just in youth ball and stuff, but there are times where you kind of forget. You don't focus on your son when you're coaching,
Right.
And then you get to sit back at the Shrine Bowl and watch him, and you really appreciate. There were probably times you weren't even giving him the credit, right, that he deserved in high school because you're so focused on team, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you're demanding more and your expectation more. And Mrs. Hudson will tell you after the medal ceremony and he's smirking as dad's like, there was some sun in my eye or something. I don't remember what was going on.
I was going to say, could you fight back the tears?
Yeah.
At the gold medal ceremony.
The responsibility, she's the one that kind of talked about, the kids in a coaching family feel the responsibility more than any other kid on the team because they know the time and effort that's been sacrificed. They've seen what even mom has to sacrifice so that dad is engulfed in his job, watching the film and doing all the extra things that it's their responsibility. It's their responsibility to uphold what this family has done. So those are all, just interesting stories, I guess, and side notes that maybe people that just come on Fridays or just their kids are there for 4 years don't see that side of it. But yeah, that responsibility of where it is. But I think he also benefited from, that however many years of the mistakes that have been made and other kids to learn off of that, here's some things that'll help you down the line.
So I've talked to Coach Snodgrass recently. I talked to Coach Beller this morning. They got a chance to be with their sons in a state championship. Did you let it go? Did you just let that moment go when it was his turn to come up and get the medal?
Not as much, but, we did, we're a pretty keep it straight family, but, we had a good moment and spoke some truth in each other's ears as the hug was really long. So it was special. Yeah, it was different.
Absolutely. I won't even ask what you said. That'll stay between you two. Here's the thing. You've got a lot of young coaches that would watch this as well, and they've got young family, and they're just getting started. And how would you advise them to get their family involved in this? Because it doesn't seem like they can ever be separate. It's got to be a team within that family unit. When a guy goes in or a gal goes in to be a head coach of any varsity sport, what would you advise them? Here's how you make this work.
Find a Heather Hudson. She's outstanding, but I do also think that it's important, and I've told some guys in some presentations that, encourage your wife to get involved and find some social media or some blogs or whatever it is that deal with being a coach's wife, because it's its own beast. She has to almost be into it as much as you do, and she has to, but it's different. But take pride in it. And there's, my wife talks to people in Oklahoma and Texas and, gets on those forums and discusses those things, and they talk a different language and they understand the pressure and they understand what's going on. So that's a benefit. Finding a balance with your kids is hugely important. We have a lot of small hobbies. We're not necessarily great fishermen, but we do some fishing. We're not great hunters, but we do some hunting. We get away from the sport a little bit, and then getting them involved early so that it becomes a family thing. I can remember Hank Hudson sitting on the sideline at a game and my wife having to yell at him to pay attention because he was chasing a butterfly or something instead of being a student manager. So it's probably a little bit too early, but those are things that I think are valuable and to make it a family affair.
Yeah, she was holding him accountable.
Yeah.
Here's one thing that a lot of people may not know about last year's championship, and that is this. you went in with a lot of guys that were returning, but on the offensive side, you said, look, we're going to do a lot of things different. We're going to move guys around. Hank moved to an H-back. You got a brand new starting quarterback and Fogelman, who did a marvelous job this year for you, or last year for you. And one of the things you said, even though you completely really revamped a lot of what you did the year before, and that was a huge gamble. But I'm going to quote you here. You said, gambling on reinventing ourselves and being right was satisfying and memorable. There's a lot of coaches that would not have taken that gamble. You did. Mm-hmm. Walk me through that decision to get there.
Well, my assistants helped quite a bit, to be honest with you, and having that trust with those guys. Multiple assistants were the ones that, again, that father, son, that family connection, and you don't want to favoritism things. And we ran a few sets their junior year where we put Hank as a fullback. And we really didn't have a fullback, so we had number 55 moving from right guard or right tackle, whatever he was, to fullback to get in the I formation and short yardage things. Semifinals, we saw a front they got into against this, and so we hit this one play, and I think he and one play had a longer run than we had the whole first time against playing Aurora, because they pretty much handed it to us the first time, and that kind of sparked something where we're like, okay, maybe we need to get some old-fashioned option sets going here, and the assistants really helped us with that and encouraged me to do that. And I know a lot of people and a lot of other coaches have tried to, here's an athletic guy that's a wrestler, let's move him down. And it's different. And an old friend of mine that coached with me at Ravenna, Coach Gangwish, he played fullback at Kansas. And, one thing he told me, was when I went from running back to fullback, and he's like, collisioning someone low is hard, and offensive linemen can't do that. And so he gave us a few tips there, and then we repped on pad level and those things, and you can see the transformation from even week 1 and 2. We're a high runner, but we're powerful, and we've got a squat that's in the mid 400s, and we can hang clean, and when we hit you, we've hit you. And having that kind of a weapon as a fullback, even for teams that run fullbacks, those guys don't come along very often. So listening to those guys to get us to do that was important. Understanding who our quarterback was going to be was huge also. He was a different kid than the kid we had the year before in Alex Christo, who was a little bit more of a gunslinger, but he was more of a pocket passer. James was going to be a rollout guy. James was going to be a better guy with his feet. What kinds of things can complement that? And I kind of go back to my background in C2, which is, the one thing that's different about C2 is you better be moving your guys around. If you got a sophomore that can get on the field, you're not going to let him be the backup when somebody who's not as good as the wide receiver, and that's where Fogelman was the year before. And so that background helped us have the courage to say, you know what, just because you're playing this position doesn't mean you get to play it all 3 years. I got to find the best place to put you so that we can be successful.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was a calculated gamble. It worked out perfectly. And again, kudos to you for having the vision to do it and having the guts to do it.
Yeah, luck pays a note too.
You know what? Very little compared to the other things, in my opinion. But here's something that I believe in, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe rarely is the best coaching job coming from the guy that wins state championship. It's
Agreed.
A great coaching job, but sometimes I think the best coaching jobs are in those years where you're 6-3, or heck, even 4-5,
2-7. One of my best coaching jobs.
That's what I want to know. Well, give me a year that wasn't, again, a top 5 rated team that you believe was the best coaching job and why that was.
First, I'm gonna throw a little respect to Ravenna. We had a couple of teams that were really good in the late 2000s. Probably 15 years ago, and injuries got in the way. I think we had a couple teams there, and I can't remember, maybe 08, 09 that, if we would have stayed healthy, we had a really good shot at being in the finals with those kids. Wasn't meant to be. Year after that, we brought back, I believe, one starter. And he was a really good running back, and I think he's still an assistant coach up there in Ryan Miller. And he kind of looked. I said, "We'll build you a line. We'll build this. We'll get it done." And he looked at me, kind of like, "I'm not sure, Coach." And we got an early game to kind of toss up to go our way, and things just started rolling. And their confidence built from that. And I think we went 7-3 that year. And by most accounts, that was a 500 football team. And so that 7-3 team that was a district champion, that's very fulfilling. Felt those kids walked out of there being like, man, we were almost as good. We were just as good as the last couple teams that were more talented. I mean, if you would have lined them up, we're probably talking a 20 point Vegas line. But yeah, when it came to record at the end of the year and how they competed, and they were all district champs. They all won a game in the playoffs, and they all did some good things. So, and then I talked about that 2-7 year. There's a couple people told me after that year that we didn't know if you were going to win a game, but the kids went into it with a mindset of don't feel sorry for yourself and compete every play and just do your best and judge yourself against yourself. Man, we competed. We competed really well that year, and that kind of sustained because a lot of those kids that were sophomores and should have been playing wound up being seniors when we got back to the playoffs 2 years later, and that helped set up these kids. So that 2-7 may have had an impact on being state champs, where those kids and those expectations just never dropped off.
Not every coach is going to have that state championship year. So what would you say to those coaches? You're in the midst of a 2-7 year. How do you stay as engaged and involved as a coach as when you're 13-0?
It's hard. And if you're at a place that's going to be 2-7 every year, you really got to love what you're doing, and you really got to be doing it for the kids. I'm a highly competitive guy, and I know there's a lot of competitive guys out there that's going to be tough for. But I think it's valuable. I think not that you should purposely do it, but I think if you're at a place that's never had that opportunity or doesn't have it every 8 to 10 years where you've got to go through it, it humbles you and it grounds you, and it helps you refocus on things. It also helps you be a better coach, where you're like, okay, I had to learn more pass concepts rather than just line up and run ISO and toss, because I got to figure out how to manipulate the ball down the field. I got to figure out how to call plays and put a drive together. Things that we talk about, and I talked to, we had a year at Ravenna where I think we were 2-6 too. Those are the 2 seasons that I probably, learned as much about motivation and getting kids to play hard. Because sometimes you got to look kids in the eye and say, you're not going to win. There's no way we're walking out of here a winner. So how are you going to compete tonight? When you walk into that game and because what happens when you see kids and you see a team quit? It's because they realize, oh, geez, it's second quarter. It's over. Well, quit playing for the scoreboard. If you play for something beyond the scoreboard, that's how you compete. That's how you continue on, because that's life. It's not always going to be a winner or loser game. And then we talked about my brothers, my family, my town. We talk about, before I get to that, the effort scoreboard. I would tell them all the time, we're going to knock off half your conditioning on Monday if you guys beat them in effort. And they'd buy into that. They'd be like, okay, we're not going to quit. We're never going to surrender. We're going to play 4 quarters. Why? Because we get to play 4 quarters. That's a little bit of an old-fashioned mentality. I'm going to hit you till the last whistle. We've gotten a little bit in this glory-based mentality of showing things on Twitter, showing things on Facebook about how awesome we are, and that, what's more awesome, somebody who never quits or somebody who easily wins 42-0? Well, maybe you should be playing somebody that's harder if you don't have to try and you're winning 42-0. So we challenged our kids to play against the effort scoreboard, out-effort the other team, play harder than they did. And they did that for a large part of that year. We talk about, why do you do what you do? Play for the people that you love and that have impacted you the most. And the thing that's most powerful, if I'm talking to a young coach, appeal to that kid's outside of football. What is it about his family that makes him tick? Who's that person? Aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa. I reference grandpas a lot. They seem to be the theme. Don't make your grandpa lie on Saturday morning. What do you mean, coach? Who's that one person that cares about you the most in the world? Who are they watching? Are they watching the ball? Are they watching the game? Are they watching the play cut? No, they're watching you. And if you're dogging it and you're not playing hard and you're not representing your family well, you're going to make that person who loves you the most, that you love the most, a liar on Saturday morning when they're drinking coffee with their buddies down at the coffee shop. Because they're all going to ask, how'd Johnny do? Johnny did great. They're going to say he stunk. They're going to say he did great. Don't make your grandpa a liar.
Right.
And so we talk a lot about dedicating and playing for those people. Who do you play for? My brothers, my family, my town. And the family part is the biggest part about that.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great visual for those kids to hold on to, too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Coach, you love defense. You've coached some incredible defenses. Yep. We're going to finish this up with what we call 3 and out.
Okay.
We got to stop them from getting a first down. So 3 kind of wacky questions out there. Let's have some fun with it. Okay. So here we go. 1st and 10. So tell me this. What does Utah coach Kyle Whittingham, former Washington coach Chris Peterson, Boone Central coach Mark Hudson, former Husker head coach Tom Osborne, and Pittsburgh coach Pat Narduzzi all have in common?
That's an incredibly tough question. I was going to say they have wacky answer, since all I can think about is Kyle Whittingham talking about his pig farmer. Were you a pig farmer? No, I was not. But yeah, him talking about off the wall questions. I don't know.
So here it is. All have degrees in psychology.
Okay.
Of course, Coach Osborne, a PhD in psychology.
Yeah, educational psychology, yeah.
And all pretty darn successful.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a thread?
Maybe. I'm gonna ride with that.
I like it. Here we go. 2nd and 9. Well, no, wait a minute. 2nd and 3. We gave up some yardage here. All right, here we go. You said that Northeast Nebraska is the SEC of Class C, right?
Okay.
In football. So I'm going to give you 3 questions here. Which SEC program does Boone Central most look like? You can take the best team, but here we go. Team personality, the personality of the team. What SEC team do you think you most look like up there at Boone Central?
Wow, that's a tough one. Well, it can't be Alabama because that's Norfolk Catholic. Maybe I'm also going to say in there, Coach Bramer. Yeah, they're in there with that.
This
okay,
good.
Yeah, this is tough.
I got spinning here. I like this.
No, this is one that we might have to just start naming players on. I'm going to say that we are going to fit in that. Coach Bramer's probably in that Georgia group where they're just, that's that same kind of fit and mentality. Maybe you could flip those. I don't know. I'm going to say we're LSU.
Okay, I like it.
Because
personality-wise,
we're a little bit out there country-wise.
Yeah.
We might be barbecuing some stuff that most people wouldn't, like they do in Louisiana. I'm not sure I'm Brian Kelly or anything like that, but we're a little bit that wacky country style.
Yeah, you know who I would have gone with?
We're not there every year, but we're good. We're good on a rotational basis, like LSU. Yeah,
I think I got it. I would have gone with Ole Miss.
Okay.
Lane Kiffin, they're out there a little bit too.
He's better on Twitter than I am.
All right, here we go. Which SEC team does Boone Central emulate when it comes to scheme? The X's and O's, scheming.
Well, defensively, probably Georgia. I mean, we're in Alabama before Georgia, but we really want to work on that forefront and that defensive line and create pressure with our ends, not blitzing. Offensively, it probably fits more that Ole Miss, that Lane Kiffin, that we're going to take shots at you, we're going to go at you. So, yeah, overall, probably Ole Miss. Even though defensively we're a little better than them.
Yeah.
But I would say, offensively and personality-wise, we're going to take some shots and we're going to do some tongue-in-cheek stuff and shrug our shoulders and just be us.
All right, one more. Which SEC team do you most emulate as far as head coach?
Well, okay.
Kind of emulate now.
Yeah. Used to be the deceased Mike Leach, because he was a guy that would talk about whatever under the sun and no one will ever come near him. But I do like getting off on tangents and discussing some different topics, and throwing the ball and doing some wide splits and being open to doing different things, I think, is what you kind of have to do when you're not kind of in the hotbed of things, where you kind of got to create some different scenarios and some different matchup things. So I think you got to kind of do some wacky things.
Yeah. The reason I thought Leach, in my opinion, and I know he's not with us anymore, sadly, but he, to me, was a psychologist.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
that guy
He's a lawyer.
was brilliant and knew what he was doing. Okay, here we go. We're now 3rd and 1. We got to have a big stand. You battled back there, held him to 2 yards. Here we go, big play. Going to be interesting what we do here. And, of course, being that big UNK middle backer, this is going to fit into that. So let's say you're in your prime. You're in the prime of your career. You get to pick a player to stop in the hole, to try to shut down in the hole. Any player, past, present, you're in your prime, they're in their prime, pro, college, high school. Who's that player you're going to try to shut down?
Oh, wow.
You got to take a mano a mano.
Well, am I going to... Do I get a chance at winning, or is this just somebody that I want to hit? And they're probably better than me.
You absolutely. You get your chance to pick anyone to
Tim
say,
Tebow.
I did it.
Tim Tebow.
Really?
He'll run me over, but I just want to lay into him just one time. Just total respect for what he did. but just he's still a quarterback, and we run the quarterback a lot. But I always wanted quarterbacks to know that in this 5 feet, yeah, you better make sure you know what you're doing. Now, he wasn't a prototypical quarterback, but yeah, that would have been fun to lay into.
You know, you would have gotten your shot, right? Let's just say this had happened. You know what he would have done? He would have run that little fake jump.
Throw it over me.
Yeah.
Outsmarted me. Yeah.
You would have come blasting in. He would have jumped
that
up,
is
boom,
not
hit
far
the
from
tight
the
end.
truth. Yeah, because sometimes as smart and understanding of things is going, yeah, I would have fallen for that, definitely.
Well, a lot of guys did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Listen, Coach, there are many people who have fallen for Boone Central. You have owned a lot of folks, but you've done it the right way. I love how you freed up your team to play.
Yep.
And it's just been a blast getting a chance to cover you here the last few years. And I'm just thrilled that you got a chance to join us today.
Fun bunch of kids this last year. You know, I had a great swagger, and they played, like I said, with a chip on their shoulder. They loved each other, and they just let it all hang out, and they backed it up. And so, you know, I always say they're kind of an old-fashioned team. They were kind of a 90s team, and you know, they didn't worry about being everybody's friend on Twitter and just let the chips fall where they may. So we'll have an entirely different group this year. Not entirely, but they'll have their own chemistry and their own personality. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, they're in great hands. Coach, thanks for joining us.
You bet. Awesome.
You bet.
Thank you for the invite.
You bet.